Hello, I'm Sean. I'll be sharing from today's lectionary reading taken from Daniel chapter 3. So in Daniel chapter 3, it tells us about the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, who builds a golden statue that's 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. And he gives the command that throughout his kingdom, whenever you hear the music being played, you were to bow down and worship the golden statue wherever you were. And for anyone that refused, they will be thrown immediately into a burning furnace and burnt alive. However, the authorities soon report their discovery. There were 3 Jewish men, they were officials, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to obey the king's command to bow down to the golden statue. And King Nebuchadnezzar is furious upon hearing this report and summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into his presence. He gives them an ultimatum, he gives them one last chance. Bow down and worship the golden statue, otherwise they will be thrown into the fiery furnace. So what was their response? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to obey the king's command. They said that God could save them, but even if he did not, they would simply not bow down and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue. Why did these men refuse? They were God-fearing Jews, so they knew the 10 commandments. And the first 2 of the 10 commandments, you can find this in Exodus 20, says, "You must not have any God but me." And secondly, God told the Israelites, "You must not make for yourself an idol or bow down to an idol. For I, the Lord, am a jealous God." And that was why Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to obey the king's command. They chose courageously to obey God. And what happened next? King Nebuchadnezzar was furious. He flew into a rage and he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were bound by soldiers and thrown into the fiery furnace. If you have any doubt that the fires were real, the writer of Daniel tells us that the soldiers who were throwing the 3 men into the fire were burnt alive. The flames were real. It was an inferno. But then a miracle happens. Nebuchadnezzar sees a 4th man walking in the furnace alongside the 3 men. It could have been an angel. And the 3 men and this 4th man were walking around, walking as if it was normal. Utterly amazed, the king then asked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out of the furnace. And upon coming out, they found that they were unharmed. They were untouched by the flames. And they didn't even smell of fire. I know I've been to countless BBQs, Korean BBQs, and every time I come out of a BBQ smelling like bak kwa. So this must have been a miracle that the smell of smoke and fire wasn't on them. And finally, Nebuchadnezzar praises the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he makes a decree that they are allowed to worship God freely. So what can we learn from this passage? Let's talk about the relation between Christians and the government. Here we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego choosing to disobey a command given by their king. It's important to look at why they disobeyed the command. It was because the king's command ran counter to what God had commanded in Scripture. God had commanded them that they were not to worship another God. We must know, and this is important, that government authorities have been put in place by God, and we should obey them as much as we can, as long as their command doesn't go against God's commands found in Scripture. If you don't believe me in this, let's look at Romans chapter 13 verse 1 to 5. Here I'm reading from the New Living Translation. "Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. The authorities are God's servants sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. So you must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but also to keep a clear conscience. Let's relate it to our situation today. We are facing a COVID-19 pandemic. Our government has been putting lots of safety measures in place, such as social or safe distancing, telecommuting, suspension of large gatherings, keeping it to 10 people 1 meter apart, practicing good social hygiene, and all that kind of social measures, safety measures that are in place. We have also seen the temporary suspension of our church services until the end of April. We as Christians need to obey our government in this. They are authorities instituted by God, and they are creating these laws for our good. These commands do not go against Scripture. In fact, I think that I believe that they support the biblical principles of loving one's neighbor. We want others to care for our health, and similarly we care for the health of others. These rules aren't just because the government wants to prevent us from worshipping in church or gathering together, but our leaders actually want to protect us during this crisis so that we can prevent the unnecessary spread of the virus and to enable Singapore to combat the COVID-19 situation well. And we should obey the authorities at this time. So we must know that all government authorities have been put in place by God. We should obey them as much as we can, as long as what they command does not go against Scripture. They are put in place for our good. But if what the government or our leaders are commanding something that goes against Scripture, then we are, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to courageously take a stand and do what God has commanded in Scripture. So that's the end of my sharing today. Hope that it helps you. God bless.